Sporting events hold a very fascinating culture to me. While I have fun going to the occasional baseball game to see the Diamondbacks get slaughtered year after year, others tend to take it a little more seriously. Every country seems to have their own way of celebrating their favorite sporting events, and from what I've seen, Europe takes soccer, or football, to the next level. Frankly, some of the enthusiasm of those fans scares me, but hey, whatever you're into. The enthusiasm of some fans can pose its own dangers, but what about the venues not being fit for such a crowd? Today, we'll discuss the disaster that was the Heysel Stadium. Hooliganism, for those of us not familiar with the term, describes violent or rowdy behavior mostly caused by young troublemakers, typically in a gang. In 1985, the term was thrown around to describe the bouts of random violence that would break out at football games typically seen in Europe. Football games swelled into the tens of thousands at times, and people are passionate about their teams. Put them in the same place for too long, and there's bound to be fights, arguments, and violence. As a preventative measure, the teams are often separated from each other, but sometimes it's not enough to stop them. In May of 1985, Liverpool was defending their championship cup. They had won the previous year against Roma, and this time they would be facing another Italian team, Juventus, who was undefeated from 1983 to 1984. On top of this, Juventus also had who is considered to be the best football player on their team at the time. So for Liverpool, the stakes were high and they were threatened. Heysel Stadium in Belgium was the location of the monumental match, and from the beginning it had its problems. It was a 55-year-old stadium at the time of the final, and it was in great need of reconstruction. It hadn't been well maintained in the last several years, and parts of it were visually crumbling. In fact, there was a cinder block wall on the outside that fans knew they could actually just kick holes into in order to gain a legal entry without a ticket. Juventus and Liverpool both requested that the match be moved, but it was denied. Fans called it a dump and were appalled that the final match was actually hosted by such a stadium. The setup of the stadium was partially the problem, but could hardly be helped. In sections X and Y on one side of the stadium were the Liverpool fans, whereas sections M, N, and O on the opposite end of the stadium were the Juventus fans. The problem lies in the neutral section Z, which was located right next to the Liverpool fans. It consisted mostly of Juventus fans. Now we have two heated teams standing pretty close to each other. With rumors of Liverpool still being pretty steamed about losing their championship to Roma in 1984, what could go wrong? It started to go wrong at about 7 p.m., just an hour before kickoff. The stadium was loaded with 60,000 people, more than 25,000 fans on each side. The only thing separating the Liverpool fans from that neutral section was a temporary chain-link fence. The Liverpool fans decided they didn't like the Z section's faces and started to harass them. They used flares and picked up chunks of rock from the stadium beneath their feet and began to throw them at Section Z. As the harassment escalated, several groups of hooligans began to rush the chain-link fence, easily overpowering the several police officers stationed there to, control thousands of people. Seeing the overpowering threat, the fans of Section Z began to flee, but they ran into a problem. There was a stone wall that was holding them in, and they began to get crushed up against it. Weakened by years of deterioration, the wall came crashing down on them. Juventus fans who had witnessed the entire attack and disaster began to riot. They tried moving down the stadium on the running track to help some of the victims, but the police intervened and stopped them. It resulted in a 2-hour-long, grueling fight with the police. 600 people were injured in the accident, and 39 were killed. Despite the large scale of the disaster, the game was allowed to continue, which is nuts to me. Liverpool players didn't even know about the extent of the disaster until they got onto their bus and were headed back to the airport, only to be surrounded by enraged Juventus fans. Police intervention were the only reason they were allowed to be free. Blame for the disaster was placed squarely on the Liverpool fans. 34 of them were arrested for questioning, and 24 were arrested for manslaughter. The stadium was also investigated, and it was concluded by the London Fire Brigade chief that the deaths were attributed very, very largely to the appalling state of the stadium. Truly a tragedy that we can all learn from. I fully support a fan's need to get excited about their team, have fun at a game, and even maybe razz the opposing fans. But nobody should ever feel like their life is in danger when they go to a game. Thanks for watching. For more true crime, true horror, and bad horror movie reviews, please consider subscribing. Game with me on Twitch every Saturday or Sunday. Follow me on Twitter, and as always, be well.